Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
And similarly, I predicted yesterday, about 6 months ago, what would be the chapter of the Brexit saga that unfolded yesterday. You remember when people said no one voted to be poorer, no one voted to be poorer. I said, just sit still. Just sit still and give it a few months and people will start claiming that they did in fact vote to be poorer. Don't be silly, James. No one's going to be that dumb. No, I promise you, sit still. Stay where you are and give it a few months. As reality begins to bite, as the truth begins to emerge, people will start to claim that they absolutely and categorically did vote to be poorer. So it started as one of my little tactics with on the phones. So people would start listing all the things, and you'd say, did you vote to be poor? Don't be ridiculous, we're not going to be poorer. Andrea Leadsom said the pound won't be remotely affected by leaving the European Union. The list was almost endless. No, absolutely not. We will not be poorer. Then very slowly it began to segue into... there might be a very short-term economic impact, which we didn't mention at all in the run-up in the campaign in any way, shape or form, but that's because, Project Fear or something, fish, passports, borders, and after that short period of economic difficulty, everything will be hunky-dory, it'll be wonderful. And that sort of began to get a little bit of traction. And I sat here and I said to you, they will claim that they voted to be poorer. People will soon be putting their hands up and saying, we definitely voted to be poorer. Because it is a hell of a lot easier to process being the idea that you've been betrayed rather than the idea that you've been fooled. That is where Britain is at the moment. And where was it yesterday? This remarkable finding. And listen, there's no monopoly on idiots. I have to make it clear. There was about 18% of Remain voters who said they'd be pleased to see, they'd be pleased to suffer economically because of the sort of schadenfreude it would give them. For Leave voters, the absolute melts, as if the idea that you losing your job or your son losing your job is going to be a price worth paying to see the look of shock upon the face of a Leave voter who's probably in denial anyway. But it's about, was it 39%? I'll dig the numbers out for you in a minute. About 39% of people who voted to Leave and are over the age of 65 apparently recorded that they would consider losing their own job, which is unlikely to occur given that they are clearly of an age where most of them will be retired, or, and this was the thing that really, even by the standards of Brexit commentary, stopped me in my tracks yesterday, they would consider that a family member losing their job was a price worth paying for ... insert whatever ludicrous post-imperial fantasy you want in that little slot there. Have you seen the other thing that started happening now? People that told us it was going to be easy and enriching and the most natural and liberating thing in history are now saying you need the spirit of Dunkirk to get through it. Dunkirk, described by Churchill as a disaster. And you have now the idea that we have to invoke the spirit of Dunkirk to get through something that was supposed to be really easy and make us richer. But again, I'm just the lonely weather vane pointing at reality while everybody else is chomping on nonsense. Think about that for a minute. Why would you need to invoke the spirit of Dunkirk, the evacuation of French beaches undertaken as a result of incredibly chaotic scenes and small boats cross. The idea that you have to invoke the spirit of Dunkirk to get through something that they told the same people told you would be brilliant. That surely, of all that, I hadn't really clocked that completely before. Set aside the historical ignorance involved in any sort of attempt to describe Dunkirk as a victory. But the idea that the same people who told you that this thing was going to be brilliant are now telling you that actually we need to be a bit like we were when we undertook the biggest military evacuation in the history of Britain. Hey? Well, hang on, either it's brilliant or it's a bit like the biggest military evacuation in the history of the United Kingdom. Which one is it? Because if we need to invoke the spirit of Dunkirk, that's about retreating. That's about stepping away from a mess. That is about fleeing, hopefully to return. So what's that got to do with Brexit? Yeah, I don't really expect an answer to that, but bear in mind, next time you hear somebody telling you that we need to invoke the spirit of Dunkirk to get through Brexit, they're the same people that told you Brexit was going to be a pile of chips. But I don't want to talk about that. I don't really want to. I mean, I know they all go viral, but I don't really want today to indulge in another exercise in sort of pulling down the pants of some poor soul who hasn't really thought things through, but is absolutely convinced that the front page of the Daily Express is akin to the governor of the Bank of England when it comes to economic acuity and insight. So I do want to talk about your family. And the strange thing that statistic there, and it's only a bit of opinion polling, and as I say, there was 18 or 19% on the Remain side who'd be happy to lose their jobs in order to wipe the smirk off the face of a Leaver. I don't quite get that, but it's the 39% of people over the age of 65 who, when polled privately, said, presumably it's not something they've said to their sons and daughters or their grandchildren, that if a family member loses their job, that would be a price worth paying for Brexit. Can't really tell us what Brexit is, because the same people that told us it was going to be brilliant are now comparing it to the biggest evacuation of the British military in the history of the United Kingdom. The same people. That's how surreal things have become. So you're not going to have a conversation with your son, are you, where you say, son, if you lose your job, it'll all be worth it because... and then list a bunch of reasons that were given to you a year ago by people who are now comparing it to Dunkirk. You just begin to despair, don't you, after a while? Wry smile, roll eyes, I don't know, gulp. And I remember about, was it 8 or 9 months ago, we took a call, I think it was from Newcastle, from a fellow that was very much going down the sovereignty line, but hadn't read that white paper in Parliament that said the British Parliament had always been sovereign. And then about 20 minutes later, his daughter rang in, and it was nice because there was clearly no lasting enmity between them, but there was a real tension between them. And it's something I was reminded of last week when we were talking about Jeremy Corbyn. If you want to ring in early and book your berth, I want to know whether or not the continuing Brexit confusions and controversies, arguments and debates have caused problems in your family. That's all I want to ask, because that figure of 39% of voters over the age of 65, Leave voters over the age of 65, genuinely thinking that it would be a price worth paying for a family member to lose their job. I actually can't get my head around that. I find that incredible. My dad got made redundant once, and to see a family... admittedly, my dad belonged to a generation where you did expect a job for life. I think redundancy and moving between jobs now is becoming a fact of life. But the idea that you would wish unemployment upon a family member because you believe that the baubles that are coming our way as a country as a result of a process which its champions are now comparing to Dunkirk, it's almost beyond belief. I don't know quite what a brain would need to do to arrive in that. Yes, it'd be absolutely fine if my son loses her job because everything's going to be great. It's a bit like Dunkirk. What? So if it's happening in your family, give me a quick buzz and talk me through it. From either side, I don't want to argue with you about Brexit. I want you to tell me what's going on in your family, behind your front door. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And you will get through, because I'm looking for personal stories rather than opinions, which always makes it a little easier to get on early. The parallels with Corbyn really struck me when we talked about that Momentum video last week. I started the programme thinking it was a bit daft. I ended the programme thinking, well, it's not daft, but it's quite dodgy. It's a dodgy illustration of where we are as a country. The next big political battles in this country are going to be generational, not ideological. It is the thing that was best distilled in that Momentum video that I hadn't clocked before. Not even to pick a side on this one, but the three lines, the university tuition fees, the access to a housing market, and the possibility of getting a job that had, advancement built into it in terms of income and in terms of promotion. Everybody in my generation had that. We had a free university education, we had access to a housing market, and we had an employment situation when we left college or school that was considerably better than people who are leaving college and schools today. So when the younger people turn around, or older people who've got the wit to understand the world around them turn around and say, why can't we have that? And Jeremy Corbyn says, yeah, I think you should have that. It's hardly surprising that they cheer him. I'm personally not persuaded that he's the man necessarily to deliver it, but that's a conversation for a different day. That generational divide fascinated me. After the programme, the number of people who got in touch to say that They didn't like the kind of characterization of some of the characters in the Momentum video. So they were a little bit central casting, and no one wants to think of their own parents as being sort of, pinched-lipped and unthoughtful and unkind. But the opinions they were coming out with, albeit in a softer way, so many people got in touch to say, that's just like my home. That is just like me. My dad, he loves me to pieces, but he doesn't think... This was one woman got in touch, with a succession of tweets, actually. She listened to the podcast, and it touched her quite a lot. She said, he doesn't think I'm an adult with agency. He still thinks I'm his little girl in a school uniform. So when I start telling him about Jeremy Corbyn, he sort of pats me on the head and goes, oh, sweet. And she's in her early 40s. And then if you're in your early 20s, I can imagine it's 100 times worse. And I think that's kind of where we are with Brexit, except perhaps it's the other way round. So what you actually have is the younger generation patronising the older generation on this, because the younger generation are looking at the numbers, and they've got friends who enjoy freedom and movement, and they live in the modern workplace, which is multifaceted, multicoloured, multicultural, multinational, and they're not frightened by it. But then they go home, possibly outside of a city and into the countryside, into the provinces, and they see the epic effort that has been put into frightening their parents. Today, and you'll think that irony has died, today the Daily Mail is trying to frighten their parents by complaining about border controls in the European Union. This is, again, it's up there with Dunkirk when it comes to surrealism. Daily Mail has spent the last, 5 years opining almost daily about the inadequacy of border controls. So now, on the front page of the Daily Mail, they're complaining about border controls being imposed. What did you think would happen if border controls were enhanced? Do you think you would go through those borders more quickly than you did before, or more slowly? Anyway, they go home and they see their families have been put in positions of fear by all of this scaremongering, all of these sort of lies with that horribly xenophobic undertone. And they're the ones that then do the patronising. They do the pat on the head and say, no, Dad, I promise you, there's no army of Turkish people waiting to arrive in Basingstoke or in Devizes. I promise you, it's just people looking for jobs. They're not coming here to steal anything or... And then, final part, 10:16, I know I've got to go to the break. Final bit, Fox News. I told you, when Roger Ailes died, some of the stuff that was written by American journalists about the fractures and divisions that had been visited upon American families by the horribly divisive and racist rhetoric pumped out daily on Donald Trump's favourite television station, it broke people's hearts. People were describing cleaning out their grandfather's house and finding that he'd hidden cash and guns in a secret compartment in his cellar because he believed Fox News when they told him that Barack Obama was going to personally come round and steal all his money. That kind of thing. I hope we're not seeing similar with Brexit, but the generational divide fascinates me. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. You can be first up if you're quick. 0345 6060973. What has Brexit done to your family? We're not here to have an argument today. We're here just to swap some stories. I don't really have any. If my dad had still been alive, I still don't know which way he would have gone, but I know which way the other members of my close family went, and there is no real divide. 10:17 is the time, and your stories will be up after this. The generational divides that I think are going to define the next big political battles in this country. You can see that my friends and colleagues in what has become somewhat unfortunately known as the mainstream media are struggling still with the Jeremy Corbyn story, as we did for months, years actually. It was the best part of 18 months on this programme. Utterly struggled to understand what was going on. Utterly failed. That's the most important word. Failed to understand what was going on. Beginning to get a better idea of it now. And it is fundamentally generational rather than political or ideological. And I want to bring it to the Brexit question, and I want to know what's going on in your family, okay? The discussions or the debates, or indeed the problems. I've got a good friend, a few people ringing in to share their thoughts on my Dunkirk analogies. I may do that if I have to, but I in the first instance, I really want to hear about what's going on in your house, because, well, that just saddens me, and I don't know where the clarity is going to come from. I don't know where the resolution is going to come from. I got a friend, three boys. Mum was about to vote leave. One of the sons works as a translator in Brussels for the European Union. So the three lads are sitting around the dinner table in a undisclosed northwest town, sitting around the dinner table and saying, Mum, Mum, saying, Mum, please, come on. Our kid's going to lose his job. And Mum is going, no, we need to do this and we need to... No, but our kid is actually going to lose his job. He works for the European Union as a translator. He's married to a French girl. Your grandchild is a child of the European Union. How can you be thinking of voting in the way that you are? And she came out with lines about, the grown-up, cleverish lines about sovereignty and things like that, things that didn't look daft before the vote happened. I think they persuaded her in the end to go the other way, but of course the lad's still looking for a job now. I just want to know what's gone on in your family. 0345 6060 973. Anders is in Vienna. Anders, what would you like to say?
Hello. Well, obviously this directly affects me because I'm a British citizen who lives within the European Union, and as of right now, the British stance means that I will no longer have my right of freedom of movement, or, of course, probably will lose a lot of the rights that I already possess here. The only reason I'm able to stay here is because my wife happens to be Irish, and so I have the ability to stay through her after the fact. Many British people that I know who are not married to EU citizens have left. A lot of them have gone to Australia and a few have gone to Canada. Tellingly, none have returned to the United Kingdom. The reason for that, of course, is that their wives simply will not have the ability to stay there, because the only reason their wives are able to stay with them is because being British or an EU citizen.
Did any of your friends or family vote for you to be put into this situation?
Many of my friends did. My mother didn't.
What sort of conversations do you have with those friends now?
Right now, I laugh at them, to be honest with you. I mean, I laugh at them because it's such a ridiculous position for them to be taking, and they're still taking it. The thing of it is that I've always been more pro-EU than anti-Brexit, and that's hardened right now, especially with regards to the way the negotiations are going on right now. Remember, there's a supreme amount of authority coming from the European Union end, but because Brexit was a form of revolution, you have this always, if you're a student of British history, and you're always told in this patriotic British way that the tyranny always follows a revolution. There's a period of chaos, and then a tyranny follows. Well, right now you're in the period of chaos. Right now.
But you're describing proper history. Unfortunately, the whip hand seems to be held at the moment by people who get their history from Commando comics and Ladybird books.
Well, they get their history from from the internet and from folkloric history.
Yes.
That's why Dunkirk is such an interesting thing to me, because it's at the point where Britain lost the Second World War is Dunkirk. Great Britain lost the Second World War, retreated to the island, and then basically, I hate to say this, but it's obviously true, it even with its vast resources of empire, had to wait for the arsenal of democracy of the United States to come along.
I'm not ready to allow that to pass. Even I occasionally have a little bit of jingoistic drum beating going on inside me, Anders, and I'm going to swiftly move you along from there. But the relationships that you have with people who voted for you to be put into this position, that's what I'm intrigued by, because you can't spend your whole life laughing at them, can you? And eventually, I suppose you're going to be all right with your Irish wife, but eventually...
No, I'm not. The thing that is, I'm not going to be all right. I'm very lucky. I'm very fortunate in the sense that I have dual citizenship. I also have an American passport, as does my wife. We're both dual citizens. She is Irish. I'm a UK citizen, but we both have American passports. And our plan B is basically to return to the United States should anything...
well, then you are going to be okay, but you're not going to be able to continue leading the life that you lead now. How do you sustain or rescue relationships with people who most of the, I get worried though, 61% of Leave voters say significant economic damage would be a price worth paying for bringing Britain out of the EU.
That's what I'm trying to tell you right now. It's a revolution, and this is the interesting thing. Here's the thing right now, okay, and this is the one thing that I'm surprised and unsettled by in the United Kingdom, is that right now the negotiations are in fact taking place.
Yes.
You are in the middle of negotiating this. Now here's the thing, is that as I said before, the European Union, Michel Barnier, has authority. He has the authority behind him. The 27 are basically in a triangle movement with him at the head, okay? He has the absolute authority. Now, opposite him is David Davis. Now, who on earth is David Davis? What does David Davis have authority for? And what's more, who does he have authority? Where does his authority come from? And subsequently, who does the authority come to? Now, if I'm talking about a revolution, think about it this way. If you have a referendum that basically strips Parliament of its authority, which is what the referendum did, if you have a House of Lords that is cowed because of threats of parliamentary sovereignty, if you have a judiciary that are called the enemies of the people, if you have the only opposition that there is the press, and it's predominantly the Tory press, which seems to be less of an opposition and more of like a baiting kind of thing, then where on earth does this authority come from? If David Davis gets a deal, and he will get a deal eventually, I'm sure, and then he takes it back. Who does he deliver that deal to? Who has the authority to say, yes, that's the deal we're going to take? That doesn't exist in the United Kingdom right now. And that's what I mean about the chaos after.
And I can't dispute anything you said, and I enjoy your analysis, not for the first time, but I do remind everybody else listening that what I'm really seeking to examine today is the notion of friction within a family and how it can be resolved. I hate the idea of these wounds going unhealed. The majority, Stuart is exactly the kind of lad I like. He says, the majority of my wife's family voted leave, even after we told them that it would affect our business. It has affected our business. So I found it very difficult when seeing them. I was so cross. But I love my wife, and I know her family are good people, so I have since put it behind me. Brackets, sort of. Brackets. And then when you see this thing that I predicted, I apologise for patting myself on the back, and everybody laughed at me when I said it will happen. People will soon be claiming that they deliberately and consciously voted to be poorer, because people are not going to turn around and say, oh my God, I got conned. They're going to turn around and say, no. I mean, if we do end up poorer, it will be because of Remainers. It will be Lily Allen's fault. It will be Michel Barnier's fault. It will be the fault of the European Union. It won't be the fault of all the people that were told that this was going to happen. So what you have now is 61% of Leave voters saying that they would accept or consider significant economic damage a price worth paying. For what? And that's where Anders' analysis is actually bang on the money, because it's not for anything tangible or cogent in the sense of objectivity. So if you brought in a brain in a vat and had to explain to it what the benefits were, you couldn't, because the brain in a vat doesn't have feelings. The benefits are feelings. It feels good. The feels are great. And if you think that I'm exaggerating when I tell you that British journalism has been reduced almost entirely to a stimulus designed to provoke feelings without any thought whatsoever, I refer you to the front page of today's Daily Mail, which astonishingly is complaining about border controls in the European Union being too tight. There you go. Satire just died. Didn't it? Border controls, border controls, border controls, border controls, need more controls, need more controls, need more controls, need more controls, get more controls, too much control, too much control, too much control, less control, we need less control, people are having to queue at airports. How the flibbity gibbet did you think you were going to control borders without spending more time looking at more people's travel documents? How did you think that was going to happen? I thought that the colour of the passport would get a special treatment. I thought there'd be like a little lane for blue passports, so we all get blue passports, and then because, we're somehow better than them, we'd have our own special little lane. What are your choices now if you've fallen into this trap? You either admit that you've been fooled or you claim you've been betrayed. No surprise that most people are going to claim they've been betrayed. But I want your family stories. 10:30 is the time. This from Katya is, I hope, at one extreme of the experiences that we're going to hear about. I am an EU citizen married to a Brit. Some in his family voted leave. It started with, it's not personal, I don't mean you. And then you'll be fine, you're married to a Brit, which is untrue, by the way, to can't wait for you to leave now, when I challenged them about it. Now my husband or I speak to them, don't speak to them anymore. We don't attend family events where we may come across them. The family is split irreparably. I hope not irreparably, I truly do. And yet, when you read that 39% of Leave voters say that losing their own or their family member's job is worth it for Brexit, it's masochism if it's your own job. But of course, the massive bulk of them are over 65, so they probably won't even have a job to lose. What they're effectively saying is, whatever it is. And I think Anders is right. We're not going to be able to quantify or describe what it is. It's a feeling. It's a bunch of emotions. Otherwise, there's no way that anyone would ever buy the Daily Mail again. 2 years complaining about border controls in Europe being too lax. Yesterday, they were tightened up. Today, the Daily Mail is complaining about them being too tight. To hold the readership in such abject contempt it's a mark of sociopathy, I think. But I hope, Katya, that those things aren't irreparable. 39% of Leave voters saying that a family member's job being lost, or their own job if they've got one, would be worth it. And when you say worth it for what, they say fish. Kate's in Wimbledon. Kate, what can you tell us?
Hello there, James.
Hello,
Thank
Kate.
you. I'm originally from Sunderland.
Yes.
And we know how they voted. And I've been here for 40 years. But most of my family are still there, and every single one of them voted out. We had discussions beforehand, and they would often get heated. And as I say, I've lived here for 40 years. I've got a husband and daughter who both work in the city.
Yes.
A daughter that lives in East London, where you couldn't get any more multicultural.
Yes.
And I tried to put those reasons across.
So you say we live in the middle of what your newspapers are telling you is awful,
Yes.
and we live in the middle of it and we love it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And their main argument was always immigration,
Yeah.
and yet I don't think they know an immigrant, to be honest. I don't think there's any living near where any of they live, and it would get heated. I would be accused of forgetting my roots.
What does that mean? Is this the
I suppose it's like if you move away from that area and you don't vote Labour anymore. It's the same sort of thing, It's sort of something that's meant to be ingrained in you. And I would be accused of that. I would be accused of being a snob. And it got really, really heated. And I think one of my relatives did vote Remain after we spoke about it at length. But I felt as I was constantly banging my head against a brick wall, and I'm sure they felt the same.
But you haven't been materially damaged yet because you are British. You haven't had your future thrown into turmoil in the way that every European Union citizen living here has.
But I mean, as I say, I've got a husband who's a commodity broker in the city. I've got a daughter who's a city-based lawyer. So
You have forgotten your roots, haven't you, Kate?
Yes, so I know. I'm exposed to different things that my relatives in the northeast aren't exposed to.
Yet.
With regard to what I get, the information I get.
Yeah, well, you mean financially and the migration
also,
of jobs.
They love the Daily Mail.
There's a brilliant one in the Telegraph today. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's relevant to what you've just mentioned about the city. So this is the headline. Tories want UK to poach top EU staff as 75% say they want to stay. This is the Daily Telegraph attempting to spin what they would describe as a Brexit positive. And what this story actually reveals is that the two agencies that David Davis said that we might be able to hang on to and they'd be part of the negotiation, but the other 27 EU countries took 4 minutes to say, no, they won't, we're taking them out of London. 23 cities now bidding to have these two agencies, the European Medicines Agency, and I always forget what the other one is. Can you remember?
No.
All right, well, there's two, and there's a bunch of jobs, and 75% of the people doing those jobs have said that they don't want to have to leave London. They don't want to move. They don't want to not know for 2 years whether their next office is going to be in Stockholm or Amsterdam. And the Telegraph is trying to claim that as a Brexit positive, because some of them might be able to stay.
Yeah, they don't. I know that my daughter, there was one of her colleagues the day after the vote who's Romanian, and she's a city-based lawyer. She was distraught because she'd been sort of approached twice that morning saying, when are you going back? And it's ridiculous.
It's the banking authority, and you're right, although she gets more materially affected than you do, and then I guess you sort of have a sort of empathy that kicks in. So oddly, I just took the mickey out the 18% of Remain voters, I may have got that number wrong, who said that they'd be happy to suffer some economic damage, I think, not to actually lose their jobs, if it meant wiping the smirk off the face of their leave voting sort of friends and family. Two problems with that, I think. The first is it won't. That because you know the idea that the will of the people isn't going to change even when the facts do. That means that your opinion of the people is incredibly low. Unfortunately, I think we're learning on both sides of the Atlantic that it's probably accurate enough to get you over the line in a binary ballot. So the will of the people will never change. Even if you prove to them that the Earth is round, they will continue to believe that the Earth is flat. There's some truth in that. The second bit of that, 18% of Remain voters would take a bit of economic damage to stop Brexit from happening. I think I'm on that list, oddly, because of people that I've heard, the 3.2 million people living here. If there was some theoretical way in which I could be a bit worse off in order to protect all of those people, and of course to ensure that my children have the freedoms that their grandparents enjoyed and their parents have enjoyed until this year, if I could somehow take a financial penalty for that to give certainty, confidence, security, stability to those 3.2 million people whose lives have been thrown into turmoil, then yeah, I might put myself on that list. So oddly, maybe those 18% of Remain voters prepared to take an economic hit to stop Brexit aren't quite as bonkers as they sound. 10:41 is the time. Kate, thank you. Carl's in Bolton. Carl, what would you like to say?
It's Salford, not Bolton, sorry.
Where are you?
Salford.
Crikey, that's a terrible mistake to make. The lad who took your calls from Stockport as well, so you'd think if anyone can work out the difference, it's you. Carl's in Salford. What do you want to say, Carl?
Certainly. Just to quickly touch on some of the stuff you've said already, the percentages of voters that are happy to take an economic hit. Now, my dad has actually told me directly, and my dad's around 59, 60 this year, that it's my generation's duty for Britain to take that hit. and basically suck it and see.
Suck it and see. Did you ask him who before the vote described the future as being a suck it and see scenario rather than a have our cake and eat it scenario?
The thing is, James, when we do discuss it and we end up getting into it, it quickly becomes apparent that there's no facts, no evidence, and it's hearsay, it's who said. I think, what about her, as you would say. No, my mother's actually the daughter of a Spanish immigrant, and she runs a childcare business which relies heavily on immigrant children coming, immigrant parents that work and need British people to look after their children. But she voted to leave, and she wants those people to go. It almost feels like my parents have been radicalised. Now we talk about other ideologies radicalising people. Why aren't we saying it about this? We're seeing people just completely throw common sense out of the window, families being divided. And as you almost said the other day, it's become like a quote religious psychology sort of, rather than a political.
Well, some of the phrases I've seen bandied around now, when I don't care if my son loses his job because we'll have what? So I mean, the slightly more respectable commentators use phrases like social unity or national unity. These are just meaningless phrases, aren't they? So how does your dad think his life is going to materially improve, or has he already sort of surrendered that hill and now accepts it's actually going to get worse, but it's good because fish?
Because fish. He basically thinks that essentially this is Britain's Independence Day, and that whole line that came out just before, June. Yeah. And it's saddening. My dad's a hard-working, working-class person, and he shot himself in the foot. And he shot my mum in the foot, and it's sad to see, but it's even sadder, this attitude that it's now my generation's problem now. That generation has let us free, but we... And
that figure there, that's 60-odd%, or rather the 39% of Leave voters who'd be happy to... That just, when I said that was going to happen, even I thought maybe I was overreaching myself a bit. We're not really going to see a massive shift in people who will begin to argue that they knew they were going to... That 350 million quid on the side of the bus, it couldn't have a more effective refutation than people now saying, no, I knew we'd be worse off. The same people who believed we were going to have 350 million quid a week to spend on the NHS now say they knew all along we'd be worse off. That you can't analyse that. That's how I know it's going to happen. Anyone hoping that there's going to be brakes put on it, it isn't going to happen, because you're talking about an utterly irrational position. I believe that there'll be £350 million a week to spend on the NHS, but I also believe that I voted in the full knowledge that I'd be worse off as a result.
Yeah, it's the exact same as today. They voted for tighter borders, but are now complaining that we have tighter borders. It's unbelievable when you say that.
Well, look, we need some good news. Are you the same Carl from Salford that rang me earlier in the year?
I am indeed.
When you were feeling a little bruised because of your failure to get a job in the media. I think you were driving a van at the time. What are you doing now, Carl?
Well, I'm a content delivery for the British Broadcasting Corporation. But it's a very nice little job that I've worked out for myself.
Told you.
I managed to break into that.
I'm doing a lot of I told you so today, but I told you you'd be all right, didn't I?
Yeah, it's a nice feeling, James, so thanks for believing in me.
Anytime, mate. We exchanged emails earlier in the year, Carl and I knew the answer to that question. I wasn't flying blind. 10:45 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the question is a fair one. I don't want to revivify or revisit well-rehearsed Brexit debates. I just want to know what's happened in your family. And I wouldn't mind hearing it from the other end, although I'll have to bite my tongue to avoid playing the role of your angry child when you say that, no, my kids are wrong. I knew I was going to be worse off. I don't care if they lose their jobs, because in the long run they're going to be better off. When I'm no longer here, they'll visit my grave and say, thank you for voting Brexit. Everything's great. And that's the kind of position I personally can't begin to grasp. I've just remembered that I do actually have a family member who I possibly feel a degree of disapproval towards, but I don't know if I'm prepared to wash that particular garment in public. A few questions before us today. We haven't banged on about Brexit for a while, but it's back at the top of the news agenda, and if anything, each passing day highlights how much more chaos there is. I think it was it the Health Secretary and the Foreign Secretary publicly contradicting each other last week? I think it was. Week before that, it was the Chancellor and the Brexit Secretary, or the International Trade Secretary. The Cabinet can't agree on what our negotiating strategy is. The actual Cabinet. So, fingers crossed. A couple of emails. Simon says, I lost my job at a bank because of post-Brexit uncertainties. I personally think it was a price worth paying for Brexit. No regrets from me. Obviously, with emails, I have no way of sort of questioning further as I do with phone calls. But Simon, if you want to just send me a brief list of what's on the plus side of that, I mean, you worked in a bank, so we can do it in an accountancy fashion. So you've lost your job, that's on the loss. What's on the profit side? What is it that makes it worth it when you say it's a price worth paying for Brexit? So you've lost your job and your income, I hope temporarily, but that's a small price to pay, or a justified price to pay for. You haven't given me anything that we're going to put on the plus column. Do you see what I mean? So do feel free to get back in touch on that. This one, unfortunately, I can't read out all of it because you've asked me not to. I'll read out the first paragraph. It's been a big divide within my family when it comes to Brexit. My parents and sister were all strongly Remain. I ended up spoiling my ballot in the vote because I was so sick of both sides. My sister hasn't forgiven me for this and is still quite bitter about it. My grandfathers were all initially pro-Leave but were persuaded to vote Remain in the end. My grandmothers ruled both roosts, and they've since said that they were glad they changed their minds. However, I have an aunt and some cousins who all voted to leave, and this has caused an enormous rift between the two parts of the family, particularly with my sister. A few weeks after the vote, we had a big family party. They decided to bring it up, and it was all rather awkward. I don't hold out much optimism that things will be patched up anytime soon. I took a decision with one family member just never to mention it again. I occasionally throw in the odd fact, but what use are they in the context of the conversation that we're having? And then two weekends ago, I spent the weekend with one of my oldest, dearest friends, who is a staunch Eurosceptic, son of a Eurosceptic MP, son of a household name Eurosceptic. As I slightly giggled inside whenever people said, "Oh, James thinks all Leave voters are racist." I'm thinking, that's my baby girl's godfather. I really don't think he's a racist. But we kind of agreed to disagree because he knew that my main reason for fearing Brexit was the upsurge in nationalism and racism. He thought I was exaggerating, and now acknowledges that I wasn't, but still believes that if we'd moved very quickly the day after leaving to set up a Norway-style membership of the EEA while retaining a little bit more independence with countries outside of the European Union, then we could have been on a cruise to victory, on a cruise to improvement. So he doesn't regret his vote in the sense that he still thinks what he voted for is plausible, but he isn't getting what he voted for. And I'm not going to let that interfere with any friendships or 30, 40-year-old friendships. 10:52 is the time. Jake's in Birmingham. Jake, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James. Thanks for having me on. I think the interesting thing, my family was largely Leave. I don't think there was anyone that was really Remain, and even if they were, they weren't staunchly so.
Sure.
My only exception to that was my dad's dad, who is the sort of typical Leave voter, so to speak. You know, he holds quite antiquated views on certain things. But he said the day after, I didn't vote, so I didn't feel as though I had the information necessary to decide.
Yeah. He was right, wasn't he? None of us did. None of us.
No, I do think that's an interesting point. And I don't think it's necessarily fair to criticise people voting on the economic concerns, because I don't think anyone had the full information. I mean, I'm curious what you make of the upsurge in investment from things like Amazon and BMW.
Well, the upsurge in investment from BMW isn't really an upsurge in investment. They're just going to carry on making minis in Cowley and fitting them with batteries and drive shafts that have been assembled in Germany. And we've mentioned that on the programme, but this is where we are, you see. The same with Amazon, actually. I'll tell you exactly what I think about that. It's incredible that so quickly things that are actually emblems of stuff staying the same as it was before. They're still going to make minis in Cowley. Amazon are still going to need a big presence in this country because we now shop so much with Amazon that that's not a tide that's ever going to be put into reverse. So people on the pro-Leave side of these arguments are now, I don't know whether you're one of them or not, they're now citing stuff staying the same as a positive. It's not a positive. What you need to tell me, Jake, is the stuff that's happening now that would not have happened if we hadn't voted to leave. You have to show me all the people who are thinking, wow, I like the look of post-Brexit Britain, I want a bit of that. Not the people who are saying, look, we're already neck deep in this country. I don't want to pull out unless we absolutely have to. Let's just carry on for the time being and see where we are in 5 years' time. So that side of the argument, amazingly, have already succeeded in bringing, half the public with them when they say, no, look, here's proof it was a great idea. That hasn't fallen apart yet.
No, absolutely. I think that's an important thing to point out, but I think it's also important to point out that we're not in post-Brexit Britain yet.
Exactly.
We're still in the process of leaving.
And we have no idea what post-Brexit Britain is going to be like, but everybody who believed they were going to have £350 million a week more to spend on public services is now telling me that they knew all along we were going to be worse off. How do you explain that?
I mean, I was a Leave voter, and the £350 million never convinced me at all, because in a narrative of austerity, that's just unrealistic. Who really thinks that's going to be the case when the main government of the day is pushing such an anti-spending rhetoric?
But if they save that money, you believed that the money existed, did you? You just didn't think they were going to spend it on the NHS?
No, I think the interesting part of the £350 million claim is it was spearheaded by Gisela Stewart, who was a member of the Labour Party.
No, it was Dominic Cummings, actually, who was Michael Gove's former advisor. He came up with it and put it on the side of the bus.
Well, at the same time, Gisela Stewart was someone who frequently cited that number as a reason.
Gisela Stewart, of course, said last month in Jason Farrell and Paul Gooding's new book that she feels the entire referendum was a betrayal of democracy, because none of the Leave campaigners are going to be held accountable for what happens next. But you knew that.
Yeah. And she's one of them, interestingly enough.
Except she's not an MP anymore.
Exactly, that's the point. She jumped ship. She refused to stand in the 2017 election. No, the reason I think the question of economic damage is such an important one now is because I think it's only just being asked. One of the reasons...
Mate, what was Project Fear then, do you think?
No, I don't think Project Fear... Here's the reason I think this, is because before the referendum, there were a lot of documentaries on why people were considering leave. And one that sort of chimed with me was one in Walsall, where they walked around the streets with all these closed shops and all these derelict buildings and said, people have nothing left. People have nothing to lose. So what is there for them to lose by staying in the same status quo? And I know that now you say the status quo is staying the same.
But they've just said themselves, they've answered your question. What is it for them to lose? They've said, my children's jobs, but I'm cool with it. I think we're having slightly different conversations here. I just steer you back to where you were before when you said that there was no economic damage involved in the Brexit vote. What do you think Project Fear was?
No, I didn't necessarily say that. I said the economic arguments didn't convince me, and I didn't think they were...
You didn't, mate. You said they weren't really part of the vote. Oh, you meant your vote. They weren't really part of your vote.
That's what I said.
Oh, fine. But they were part of everybody else's. The answer to what have we got to lose is, of course, your children and your grandchildren's jobs, but they possibly didn't realise that in Walsall.
I do actually have to contend that. I don't think... I've just been looking at Lord Ashcroft's poll from the Thursday after the referendum. The three main concerns for leaving was, one, to have decisions made here. Two, to have control over borders, which is sceptical regardless. And the last one was, I can't remember the third one, but it was nothing to do with economics.
Well, Dominic Cummings, who ran the Leave EU campaign, is absolutely adamant that without the bus they would never have got over the line.
I'm not...
And we don't have to believe him. I mean, he's not infallible, but he was the architect of the sort of respectable Leave campaign, and he's described what's happened since in the most unforgiving of terms. I think he described David Davis the other day as being as thick as mince, and they're on the same side.
Well, I think the interesting part is that economics, as an argument against independence, worked in 2014 against the Scottish independence referendum, so they thought it'll work again. And it didn't, and people weren't concerned about it.
Because they didn't believe it, and now it's coming true. They're saying, no, we knew all along. That's the only thing I'm examining. We can agree on that, can't we?
I agree with you there. I think people feigning this benevolent knowledge of, we knew it was going to get worse. Well, no, you didn't. You just didn't listen. I think that's something that needs to be addressed. I'm not in any way ardent Eurosceptic. I'm not saying that Leave is going to make Britain the best thing in the world. You know,
what's going to be better?
Personally, I'm this parliamentarian, and I think the sovereignty side of things is better. But I know people will very sceptic about that, but I do think that's what's going to
the Brexit White Paper stated British Parliament has always been sovereign.
Well, what about things like the ECJ, which has... European Court of Justice
is nothing to do with the European Union.
No, you have to be signed up to the ECJ to be part of the single market.
Yes, but we can't sell into the single market without obeying the rules laid down by the European Court of Justice. So you know, and I know, that what they're going to do is come up with an intranational, a supranational body that gets to legislate over trading standards and similar legal situations, but they're just going to call it something else. They've already said that.
Well, maybe they've said that, but that's not necessarily what's going to happen.
Okay, here's the thing. You make something and you want to sell it in France, but if you want to sell it in France, you're selling it in the single market. Who's in charge of the rules and regulations you have to obey if you want to sell something into the single market?
Well, it will be the European Court of Justice.
So we're not going to be out of its legislation or its rules?
No, but I think that's the interesting thing. We have the ability to say no, and I don't think we have that ability when we're in the European Union.
To say no to what?
To say no to the demands of...
No, to say no to selling stuff in France?
No, because I don't...
If you want to sell stuff in France, you have to say yes.
No, I don't think people are actually that fussed about where they sell things, as long as they do sell things.
Well, I think they probably are more likely to sell stuff just, 20 miles away over the English Channel than they are a couple of thousand miles away in America. My geography's probably a little questionable there. But again, you know, I like speaking to young people who are optimistic because it gives me a little bit of hope, as opposed to all the old people who are comfortable seeing their own children lose their jobs as a price worth paying for not having to obey regulations about selling stuff into the single market. Take a couple more calls on this. I've got a couple of Simons in the north of England who've been waiting. We haven't heard many female voices yet. We heard from Kate, Sunderland resident, relocated to Wimbledon and struggling with some of the family members who voted to leave the European Union, with two relatives, a daughter and a husband, both working in the square mile. She's already seeing some of the impacts. And then I just want to show you something quite interesting. Graham says, Project Fear on both sides. Remember the Chancellor and the Prime Minister saying that if we vote to leave the European Union, house prices will go down immediately by 18% or more. I don't, actually. If they did say that, I presume it would have happened after the economic impact of leaving had kicked in. But I'll take your word for it, Graham, because you seem like a stand-up guy. And then I'll read you what Simon says, who got in touch earlier about the fact that he'd lost his job but considered it a price worth paying. He did immediately find another job on a bigger salary, so I don't think you really count as someone who thinks it's a price worth paying. You have to actually be unemployed. But Simon says, the credit side to my job loss is that the UK ultra bubble should now deflate, and those 20 years of hyper house price metropolitan inflation that is accountable for so much anxiety and which you cite on the programme often could come to an end. So there you go, Graham and Simon. Graham convinced that it was a great thing to do because house prices are going up, and Simon convinced that it's a great thing to do because house prices are going to come down. And you wonder why I sometimes look a bit like a Wimbledon spectator moving from one end of the court to the other. Simon's in Leeds. Simon, what would you like to say?
Yes, James. Just to say I've not spoken to my dad since the actual day of the referendum result.
Oh, gosh.
As a result of this. Obviously, relationships are complex, and
yes,
this was just kind of the final straw. I come from one side of my family is we've got Bosnian granddad who's Muslim,
yes,
and then the other side are all born in Yorkshire, and it's that side that I've not spoken to any of them since then. My sister's on Facebook, I'm not, but she sees the post and they're all almost like EDL posts following that. And it's just upsetting, really.
Well, it sounds it. And obviously lots and lots of people who voted Leave are just as repulsed by the EDL-type ideology and rhetoric as you and I are, and everybody else listening is. Actually, I always feel I need to say that, but certainly if you were to take social media as a test, then you'd probably be able to argue that I'm wrong when I say that there is a lot more support for those sort of warped, radicalised ideas out there than perhaps anybody realised before last year. But what would have happened? This is a question I really want you to answer. What would have happened if it had gone the other way? If Remain had won, I'm pretty sure that your dad wouldn't have cut you out of his life.
Probably not, but that's because we were voting for a status quo. We'd have got up the next day and everything had been the same.
Yes.
That's not what's happening. What's happening is we're pretty much careering towards a cliff edge, and that's the difference in the two sides.
And then they say now, this is what I find so bizarre about this polling yesterday, they say, no, we knew there was going to be a cliff, but it's not going to be a very big one, and anyway, falling off it is a price worth paying for, insert, whatever you want, sovereignty, fish or blue passports.
Lots of them aren't going to pay at that price, though. My dad isn't. He's retired. And the majority of people who voted Leave are in that age bracket where they're not dependent on jobs. And I personally won't be affected by Brexit. Just in terms of my own job, I'll probably keep it because it's kind of in an industry where chaos actually benefits it. But
are you a bailiff?
Well, I don't really want to go into what I do.
Yeah, he's a bailiff.
What I do.
He's a bailiff.
It's not a bailiff.
All right, he's not a bailiff. Loan shark. He's a loan shark.
It's not, no. I work in the hydroponics industry.
Oh, okay. So you think that people are going to be growing their own more because they're not going to have as much money? And I think we better leave it there. Your sister's studying in Germany, so your dad voted to stop future generations having the freedom to study in Germany that his own daughter is currently enjoying.
Yeah, I mean, that's the insanity of it.
Yep.
And she pleaded with him, and I pleaded with him prior to that. I thought about trying to speak to him after the election, particularly as
It's a mate, I'm losing the phone. Simon, the phone line's gone south. It wasn't great to start with, so we'll talk again, I promise. I've got another Simon, not far from you, in Grimsby. Simon, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Good morning.
Hello, mate. What's on your mind?
Hi. Hi. I'm just one of these people that voted Brexit because they were swayed by the £350 million on the side of the bus. I'm embarrassed to say.
Well, I don't think you should be embarrassed. You see the calibre of some of the people that were photographed alongside that bus. It wasn't just the lying racists. You know, there were respectable politicians like Michael Gove and Gisela Stewart were photographed outside it as well. What happened? Why have you lost hope that isn't going to happen?
Well, really, just listening to the other side of the argument, the town is very, very, very steeped in Brexit.
Because of the fishing fleet, the heritage of the fishing fleet in Grimsby.
Yeah, I mean, that was the other thing. I'm Grimsby born and bred. I remember the fishing fleet being big and the town being more successful than it was, than it is now, rather.
Yeah.
And it's a shadow of its former self. And so when you give them the hint that maybe things could be better, on top of this, I will say that the 350 million was the thing that swayed me the most. See,
I think that you are, dare I say it, you display a rare honesty, because this is the more common response you get now from people who were gulled as you were gulled. They're not going to admit they were gulled. They're going to say they knew all along that it wasn't, it had nothing to do. It was a random number. Here's an example. The bus never said 350 million to the NHS. It said, we send the EU 350 million a week. Let's fund the NHS instead. Where did it say give 350 million to the NHS? We're not all thick, James.
Yeah, well, I remember. I'm sure it was Michael Gove who said they could use 350 million on the NHS.
Yes, but you're being honest, and you're responding to what you believe to be facts.
It's what you say all along, isn't it? It's when you give them the facts, you have to change your position sometimes.
No, not if you've got the will of the people front and centre. The will of the people is a catchphrase designed to prevent people from changing their minds when the facts change, even from acknowledging the possibility that they might want to change their mind, because if you hold the people in absolute contempt, then you can argue passionately that they'll never change their mind, they'll never recognise that the world is round, they'll carry on believing that it's flat, whatever evidence they're given. And I just never know how many people there are in that category. You clearly aren't.
There are a lot of people like that.
Yes.
But I also think there are a lot of people like myself who, given a second chance, would vote a lot differently. The day after, both of my kids couldn't believe what I'd voted for.
Well, they're Grimsby born and bred as well.
They are, but my son's been to university. He's got a. I don't want to make myself sound like a small village idiot.
There's no danger of that, mate. Honestly.
Well, but what I'm saying is, I think he was a bit more level-headed. I think I went with my heart.
Well, should we say a broader worldview then?
Well, yeah.
Is that or is that not? I mean, no, let's not even say that. Let's just say you went with your heart and you bought into some of the sloganeering and the demagoguery, and your boy didn't. So there you go. He's a credit to you, Simon.
Well, I think he is. And he definitely is. But I do remember the time when the town was a lot more prosperous.
But every town in England was a lot more prosperous in that if you go back. And Kidderminster is a devoid of shop fronts now, and it was Jake in Birmingham, who was a lovely caller. Unfortunately, that European Court of Justice red herring seems to still be stuck in an awful lot of people's gullets. But describing empty shops in Walsall, it's a common experience. And weirdly, the most likely business, thriving business, to contribute tax to the Treasury and revivify relatively rundown parts of town, in recent years, it's likely to be a Polski sklep in a lot of parts of town, isn't it? But no, we don't want them. We'd rather keep the shop fronts shut. Simon, thank you, mate. I hate it when people feel that they may be kind of exposing themselves to ridicule. If you're being honest and fact-based, there's no danger whatsoever of me concluding that you're some sort of village idiot. The definition of idiocy is not to change your mind when the facts change. But I guess we're in the age of, what is it, ultra-crepidarianism. Yes, and I had to look that one up as well. It's coming up to 11:15. I'm going to knock that on the head now.